They said she was too old for the job. Until she revolutionized the entire company. At 62 years old, Margaret Chen walked into that boardroom knowing they had already written her off. The smirks on their faces said it all. What could this gray-haired woman possibly know about cutting-edge technology? They were about to find out that age isn't just a number. It's a superpower they never saw coming. But what happened next would shatter every assumption they had about experience, wisdom, and what it truly means to innovate. Meet Margaret Chen, a woman who had spent 4 decades climbing the corporate ladder, only to be pushed off it when she turned 58. After being restructured out of her VP position at a major consulting firm, Margaret had spent 4 years watching rejection letter after rejection letter pile up on her kitchen table. The message was always the same, though never spoken directly. She was too old, too expensive, too set in her ways for the fast-moving world of modern business. For younger candidates, the job market was an ocean of opportunity. For Margaret, it felt like a desert where every door was marked with an invisible sign. No one over 50 need apply. But Margaret wasn't the type to give up. She had raised 3 children as a single mother while earning her MBA at night. She had built marketing campaigns that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. She had mentored dozens of younger employees who had long since surpassed her in salary and title. If experience counted for anything, she was overqualified for almost every position she applied for. The problem was, experience seemed to count for nothing in a world obsessed with digital natives and fresh perspectives. That's when she heard about TechFlow Dynamics, a struggling software startup that had burned through 3 CEOs in 2 years. The company had brilliant technology, a revolutionary project management platform that could transform how businesses operated. But they couldn't seem to figure out how to actually run a business. The job posting was for a chief operations officer, someone to bring stability and strategic thinking to a rapidly growing tech company. Margaret knew she was perfect for the role. She also knew that the moment they saw her gray hair and laugh lines, she'd be dismissed as another relic from the pre-digital age. So she did something that shocked everyone, including herself. She applied anyway. The first round was a phone interview with Jake Morrison, the 28-year-old founder and CEO. Jake was everything you'd expect from a tech entrepreneur, hoodie-wearing, energy drink-fueled, and absolutely convinced that anyone over 40 was technologically illiterate. "So Margaret," Jake said, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for humoring older relatives, "tell me about your experience with agile development methodologies." Margaret smiled even though he couldn't see her. "Well, Jake, I've been using iterative project management techniques since before they had a trendy name. Back in the 90s, I was running marketing campaigns that required constant testing, adjustment, and rapid deployment based on real-time data. We just called it good business sense, instead of agile methodology." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, okay. And what about your social media experience?" "I've been studying digital marketing trends for over a decade. I understand that platforms like TikTok and Instagram aren't just entertainment. They're powerful business tools that can reach demographics traditional advertising can't touch. I may not be a digital native, but I'm certainly digital fluent." The phone interview went better than expected, which surprised Jake enough to invite her for an in-person meeting. That's when things got interesting. Margaret walked into the TechFlow offices, a converted warehouse in Austin filled with ping-pong tables, beanbag chairs, and walls covered in motivational posters about disrupting everything. The average age of the employees appeared to be about 25, and they all looked up from their laptops with barely concealed confusion when Margaret entered. She was led to a conference room where 5 people waited. Jake, his co-founder Amy Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, and 3 other executives who looked like they'd been recruited straight from college career fairs. "So," Jake began, leaning back in his chair with studied casualness, "tell us why someone with your extensive experience wants to work at a startup." The way he said extensive experience made it sound like a polite euphemism for ancient. Margaret straightened in her chair. "Because I've seen what happens when brilliant ideas are poorly executed. You have revolutionary technology here, but your customer retention rate is 37%, your employee turnover is 60%, and you've missed your last 4 quarterly projections. You don't need more innovation, you need operational excellence." Amy leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "How do you know our internal numbers?" "Because they're not internal anymore when you're hemorrhaging clients and employees at this rate. Your former customers are posting about their experiences on LinkedIn. Your ex-employees are leaving Glassdoor reviews. The information is all there if you know how to analyze it." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Well, those are just growing pains. We're disrupting an entire industry here. No, Margaret said firmly, you're disrupting your own company. Disruption without discipline is just chaos with better marketing. The room fell silent. These were people accustomed to having their vision praised and their methods celebrated. No one had ever told them that their beloved startup culture might be the problem, not the solution. Margaret continued. You're hiring based on cultural fit instead of competence. You're prioritizing speed over sustainability. And you're so focused on being different from traditional companies that you've forgotten the basics of how successful businesses actually operate. Like what? Challenged Amy. Like having clear communication channels instead of expecting everyone to just figure it out. Like establishing consistent processes instead of reinventing the wheel for every project. Like understanding that your clients aren't just buying your software, they're buying reliability, support, and results. Margaret pulled out her tablet and showed them a detailed analysis sheet prepared. Your biggest client, Peterson Manufacturing, canceled their contract last month. Not because your software doesn't work, but because when they had problems, it took your support team 3 days to respond, and when they did respond, they acted like Peterson's concerns were unreasonable. Jake's jaw tightened. Peterson Manufacturing had been their showcase client, the success story they highlighted in every sales presentation. How could you possibly know about Peterson? Amy asked. Because I called them. I told them I was considering TechFlow for my consulting practice, and asked about their experience. They were happy to share, in great detail. Margaret swiped to the next screen. I also called 6 other former clients. The pattern is consistent. Great product, terrible customer service, non-existent account management. You're building software for businesses, but you're running your company like a college dorm. The silence in the room was deafening. These young entrepreneurs had been told they were geniuses, disruptors, the future of business. No one had ever suggested that their approach might be fundamentally flawed. So what would you do differently? Jake asked, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Margaret smiled. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. First, I'd implement proper project management systems. Not because I'm old-fashioned, but because chaos doesn't scale. Second, I'd establish customer success protocols that prioritize relationship building over ticket closing. Third, I'd create training programs that help your brilliant young developers understand that technical perfection means nothing if clients can't use it effectively. She clicked to another slide. Most importantly, I'd help you understand that experience isn't the enemy of innovation. It's innovation's best friend. Every mistake you're making, every problem you're facing, every challenge you think is unique, I've seen it before. Not because I'm old, but because I've been paying attention. Amy was frantically taking notes. Jake stared at Margaret with something that might have been respect. The other executives looked like they were seeing the company clearly for the first time. But here's what I won't do, Margaret continued. I won't try to turn you into IBM. I won't kill your creativity or your energy. What I'll do is help you channel that energy into sustainable growth instead of beautiful chaos. The interview ended with handshakes all around and promises to be in touch soon. Margaret left feeling cautiously optimistic, but she'd been down this road before. She knew that enthusiasm in the moment often faded when it came time to make actual decisions. 3 days later her phone rang. Margaret? This is Amy from TechFlow. We'd like to offer you the COO position. Margaret nearly dropped the phone. Really? Just like that? Well, not just like that. After you left, we spent 2 hours going through your analysis point by point. Then we called Peterson Manufacturing ourselves. Then we looked at our other client feedback with fresh eyes. You were right about everything. Amy paused. Jake wanted me to tell you something. He said he was scared to hire you because he thought you'd try to change everything about the company culture. But after thinking about it, he realized that's exactly what we need. Someone who isn't afraid to tell us the truth. Margaret started the following Monday. Her first day was a culture shock for everyone involved. She arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, early by TechFlow standards, where most employees wandered in between 9 and 10. She wore a business suit in an office full of t-shirts and sneakers. She asked for a proper desk instead of a beanbag chair. The young employees watched her with fascination and suspicion. Who was this formal, punctual woman, and what was she going to do to their beloved startup culture? Margaret's first move surprised everyone. Instead of implementing new rules or changing existing policies, she spent her first week just observing and listening. She sat in on client calls, attended team meetings, watched how projects moved from concept to completion. She took notes, but she didn't criticize or suggest changes. At the end of the week, she called a company-wide meeting. Everyone gathered in the main workspace, perching on desks and leaning against walls in typical TechFlow fashion. Margaret stood at the front with a presentation remote, looking like a professor addressing a classroom of skeptical students. "I've spent 5 days learning how you work," she began, "and I want to start by telling you what you're doing right." The room relaxed slightly. They'd expected criticism, not praise. "You have something that most companies spend years trying to develop: genuine collaboration. You help each other without being asked. You share knowledge freely. You're not territorial about your work or your ideas. That's incredibly rare and incredibly valuable." Nods around the room. This was more like it. "You're also willing to take risks, to try new approaches, to fail fast and learn faster. That's the foundation of real innovation." Margaret clicked to her next slide. "But there's a difference between being flexible and being chaotic. There's a difference between being collaborative and being unstructured. And there's a difference between taking risks and being reckless with other people's money and trust." The room grew quiet again. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep everything that makes TechFlow special, and we're going to add the structure that makes it sustainable." Over the next 3 months, Margaret implemented changes that seemed small but had massive impact. She created standard operating procedures for customer onboarding, not rigid scripts, but flexible frameworks that ensured nothing fell through the cracks. She established regular check-in meetings between development teams and client success teams. She instituted code review processes that caught bugs before they reached clients. Most importantly, she created mentorship programs that paired experienced team members with newer hires. The twist? She positioned herself not as the mentor, but as a student eager to learn about new technologies and approaches. "I need you to teach me about your development process," she'd tell the programmers. "Walk me through how you build features, what tools you use, where the bottlenecks are." At first they were confused. Wasn't she supposed to be managing them, not learning from them? But as Margaret asked smart questions and offered insights from her decades of project management experience, something magical happened. The young developers began to see her not as an out-of-touch supervisor, but as a valuable collaborator who brought a different perspective to their work. The results were immediate and dramatic. Customer retention jumped from 37% to 68% within 6 months. Employee satisfaction scores increased by 40%. Most importantly, TechFlow started hitting their quarterly projections consistently for the first time in company history. But Margaret's real breakthrough came during a crisis that would have destroyed the old TechFlow. Their biggest new client, a logistics company called Freight Forward, was implementing TechFlow's software across their entire operation. The rollout was scheduled for a Monday morning, affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in daily transactions. On the Friday before launch, disaster struck. A routine software update had introduced a bug that crashed the entire system whenever more than 50 users tried to access it simultaneously. Freight Forward's implementation would have thousands of concurrent users. The system would fail spectacularly, publicly, and expensively. The development team was in full panic mode. Jake was pacing the office, muttering about lawsuits and bankruptcy. Amy was frantically calling their backup servers, trying to find additional capacity that didn't exist. Margaret walked into the chaos and did something that stunned everyone. She started making phone calls. Her first call was to Freight Forward CEO. Instead of making excuses or buying time, she was completely honest. "We've discovered a critical bug that will prevent Monday's launch from proceeding as planned. I want to discuss options that protect your business while we resolve this issue." Her second call was to a former colleague from her consulting days who now ran IT operations for a major financial services company. "David, I need a favor. I need to borrow server capacity for about 2 weeks while we rebuild our architecture." Her third call was to Peterson Manufacturing, the client who had canceled months earlier. "This is Margaret Chen from TechFlow. I know we haven't earned back your trust yet, but I need to ask you about the server configuration you used during your pilot program." While the young team watched in amazement, Margaret orchestrated a solution that none of them had even considered possible. She negotiated a 2-week delay with Freight Forward, arranged temporary server space from 3 different companies, and assembled a team of freelance developers who could work around the clock to rebuild the affected systems. But the real magic happened in how she managed the crisis communication. Instead of hiding the problem or downplaying its severity, Margaret created a transparent timeline that she shared with all stakeholders. Clients knew exactly what had happened, what was being done to fix it, and when they could expect resolution. Employees knew their roles, their deadlines, and how their work fit into the bigger picture. Most importantly, she positioned the crisis not as a failure, but as an opportunity to demonstrate TechFlow's commitment to their clients' success. Anyone can deliver good service when everything goes according to plan, she told the team during one of their marathon weekend sessions. What separates great companies from good companies is how they handle the unexpected. The freight forward launch happened 2 weeks later, flawlessly. The client was so impressed with TechFlow's crisis management that they signed a contract extension before the original implementation was even complete. But the real transformation wasn't in the software or the servers, it was in how the TechFlow team saw themselves and their work. You know what I realized? Jake told Margaret during their weekly one-on-one meeting. I thought experience was just about knowing old stuff. I didn't understand that it's actually about pattern recognition. You see problems coming that we don't even know exist yet. Amy nodded enthusiastically. And you taught us that being professional doesn't mean being boring. It means being dependable. Margaret smiled. You taught me something too. You taught me that innovation isn't about age, it's about curiosity. Some of the most creative solutions to our problems came from team members who've been coding for less than 2 years. 6 months after Margaret joined TechFlow, the company achieved something that had seemed impossible. They were profitable, growing, and genuinely loved by their clients. Industry publications started featuring TechFlow as a case study in sustainable startup growth. Venture capital firms that had previously dismissed them began calling with investment offers. The real vindication came when Peterson Manufacturing reached out about returning as a client. We've been watching what you've done with Freight Forward, their CEO explained during a conference call. The way you handled that crisis, the way you've transformed your customer service, that's the TechFlow we wanted to work with from the beginning. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Margaret received a LinkedIn message from a woman named Patricia Williams, a 55-year-old marketing executive who had been job hunting for 18 months after being laid off. I saw the article about you in TechCrunch, Patricia wrote. I wanted to thank you for showing that our careers don't have expiration dates. I just got hired as VP of marketing at a fintech startup, and during the interview I referenced your story about bringing experience to innovation. They hired me not despite my age but because of what I've learned over the years. The message was followed by dozens of similar notes from older professionals who had found new opportunities after years of rejection. Margaret had become something she never expected, a symbol of hope for experienced workers who refused to be written off. At TechFlow's one-year anniversary celebration, Jake stood up to address the company. The office had grown from 15 to 45 employees, but it still retained its collaborative, creative culture. A year ago we thought we were pretty smart, Jake began, getting chuckles from the team. We had great technology and unlimited enthusiasm. What we didn't have was wisdom. He looked directly at Margaret. Margaret didn't just bring operational expertise to TechFlow. She brought something much more valuable. She brought perspective. She helped us understand that disruption without discipline is just expensive chaos. She showed us that experience isn't the enemy of innovation, it's innovation's secret weapon. The applause was thunderous, but Margaret wasn't done transforming the company. Her next initiative was the most ambitious yet, the TechFlow Mentorship Program, which paired experienced professionals over 50 with high-growth startups. The program addressed 2 problems simultaneously, helping older workers find meaningful roles in tech companies, and helping young companies avoid the mistakes that sink most startups. Within 6 months, the program had placed 37 experienced professionals in strategic roles at various startups. The results spoke for themselves. Participating companies showed 50% higher survival rates and 30% faster growth compared to similar startups without experienced leadership. Age is just a number, Margaret explained to a reporter who was writing about the program's success. But experience? Experience is a superpower that only gets stronger with time. The story of Margaret Chen and TechFlow became legendary in startup circles, but not for the reasons you might expect. It wasn't just about an older worker proving her worth. It was about an entire industry recognizing that diversity of experience, like diversity of background and perspective, makes companies stronger. Jake, who had initially hesitated to hire someone over 60, became one of the most vocal advocates for age diversity in tech. We used to think that hiring experienced people meant sacrificing innovation, he said during a panel discussion at a major tech conference. What we learned is that experience doesn't kill innovation, it makes innovation sustainable. Margaret's story spread beyond tech into other industries where age discrimination was common. Law firms began actively recruiting experienced attorneys who had been pushed aside for younger partners. Marketing agencies started valuing the perspective of professionals who understood both traditional and digital approaches. But perhaps the most important change was in how older workers saw themselves. Instead of apologizing for their experience or trying to hide their age, they began positioning their years of work as exactly what companies needed most. "I'm not too old for this job," became the rallying cry. "This job is too young for me to ignore." Margaret Chen proved that age isn't a limitation. It's a competitive advantage that smart companies can't afford to overlook. In a world obsessed with youth and disruption, she showed that experience and wisdom aren't relics of the past, but essential ingredients for building a sustainable future. The next time someone tells you you're too old, too experienced, or too set in your ways, remember Margaret's story. Remember that every no based on age is really just someone else's failure to recognize the value of wisdom, perspective, and the kind of deep understanding that only comes from years of learning, adapting, and growing. Because in the end, age really is just a number. But experience? That's priceless. What assumptions do you make about age and ability? Have you ever been judged too harshly based on stereotypes? Share your thoughts, because in a world that's quick to dismiss people based on superficial factors, we all need reminders that talent, wisdom, and innovation have no expiration date.